Modern bourgeois crisis theories, the phenomena of economic reality, which marked a new period in the development of capitalism, the period of the general crisis of the world capitalist system, could not remain unnoticed by bourgeois economists. No matter how zealous they may be in protecting the interests of the dominant monopolies, it is still impossible to suppress or deny the extraordinary severity of economic crises and the presence of chronic mass unemployment. Fulfilling the social order of their masters, bourgeois economists with the greatest zeal create various theories according to which both unemployment and crises are caused by random circumstances and can be destroyed or, in any case, significantly weakened, while maintaining the existing capitalist system. There is little new and original in these theories. Usually, the old, long disproved propositions of vulgar political economy are repeated, but only somewhat modernized, adapted to new conditions. The severity of the crises and the presence of mass unemployment could not but contribute to the spread of dissatisfaction with the capitalist economic system among the broad masses of the population, the growth of revolutionary sentiments. At the same time, the developing and prosperous Soviet Union and the countries of people's democracies, by the very fact of their existence, testify to the possibility of such a social system in which there are no crises and cannot be, just as there can be no unemployment. Earlier, bourgeois theories served as a means of justifying and defending capitalism of free competition and the struggle against socialist ideas. Modern bourgeois theories serve as a means of defending monopoly capitalism and a means of struggle not only with the ideas of socialism, but also with already realized socialism, with the already existing, rapidly and successfully developing socialist economic system. Under these conditions, the struggle of bourgeois political economy against socialism becomes more and more difficult. The meaninglessness and insignificance of the scientific investigations of bourgeois economists is fully revealed. Bourgeois political economy has always resorted to lies and demagoguery. But now these qualities of bourgeois science have multiplied many times over. In order to hide the true tasks and essence of their theoretical inventions and have at least some opportunity to influence the broad masses of the people, modern bourgeois political economy resorts to the most sophisticated methods of demagogy and deception, and in the fight against socialism, and to shameless lies and slander. Bourgeois political economy pretends to be a supraclass science, which supposedly has the goal of protecting the interests of the whole society, but the chatter about common interests, which in abundance fills the scientific treatises of bourgeois economists, used to fool readers, cannot hide as class content and the utter insignificance of their theories. One of the most widespread in bourgeois political economy is the theory of unemployment and crises by the English economist Keynes, which has found quite a lot of followers in all capitalist countries. If we discard the pseudo-scientific fabrications, deliberately expressed in verbose and very vague scholastic reasoning, then the essence of his theory will turn out to be very simple. According to Keynes's theory, the cause of unemployment and crises is the lack of demand for goods in comparison with their supply. Lack of demand is caused by the psychology of people who do not use all their income. Lack of demand for consumer goods is due to excessive frugality. The lack of demand for the means of production is due to the lack of inclination of the capitalists to make investments. Thus, somewhat modernized old theories of underconsumption and overcapitalization are being reproduced. Once, supporters of the theory of underconsumption explained the lack of demand for consumer goods by the low standard of living of the broad masses of the population, by their low incomes. But Keynes and his followers, when speaking of insufficient demand for consumer goods, do not mean the broad masses of the population. They mean the wealthy classes of the population who, in their opinion, spend too little to meet their personal needs. Accordingly, one of the ways to eliminate the lack of demand for personal consumption items and, consequently, to eliminate or weaken crises and unemployment, should be an increase in the consumption of the propertied classes, the rejection of the latter from thrift. It is not hard to understand that these hypocritical arguments about the excessive frugality of the wealthy classes of the population serve as an excuse for the riotous life of financial plutocrats. These theories aim to convince the broad masses of the population, suffering from unemployment and crises, that they are interested in the wealthy classes living as luxuriously as possible. Only shameless servility to the propertied classes can explain the fact that such vulgarities are presented as the latest achievements of science. But the demand for bathrooms is old theories of underconsumption and overcapitalization. Once, supporters of the theory of underconsumption explained the lack of demand for consumer goods by the low standard of living of the broad masses of the population, by their low incomes. But Keynes and his followers, when speaking of insufficient demand for consumer goods, do not mean the broad masses of the population. They mean the wealthy classes of the population who, in their opinion, spend too little to meet their personal needs. Accordingly, one of the ways to eliminate the lack of demand for personal consumption items and, consequently, to eliminate or weaken crises and unemployment, should be an increase in the consumption of the propertied classes, the rejection of the latter from thrift. It is not hard to understand that these hypocritical arguments about the excessive frugality of the wealthy classes of the population serve as an excuse for the riotous life of financial plutocrats. These theories aim to convince the broad masses of the population, suffering from unemployment and crises, that they are interested in the wealthy classes living as luxuriously as possible. Only shameless servility to the propertied classes can explain the fact that such vulgarities are presented as the latest achievements of science. But the demand for the means of production, say the apologists of modern monopoly capital, is also insufficient. Capitalists, according to Keynes, do not properly use their income for investment. Since investment is unprofitable, the expected income from them is insufficient to stimulate entrepreneurial activity. The most significant reason for the disadvantage of investment is, according to Keynes and his followers, too high wages. Hence the conclusion is drawn that in order to stimulate investment, it is necessary to keep real wages at a low level and, in general, to create conditions for more intensive exploitation of workers, in particular through inflation. This recommendation is made in an extremely disguised form, but this is exactly what all lengthy, quasi-scientific discourse on stimulating investment boils down to. Still, under all conditions, new investments are risky. On this basis, Keynesians propose that the state should take on the risk associated with investments, that the state should provide financial support to the capitalists at the expense of the budget, the main income of which comes from taxes paid by workers. Thus, one of the means of combating crises and unemployment is openly declared the robbery of workers and, first of all, workers, both as hired workers and as taxpayers. It scarcely needs proof that this kind of reasoning is sheer nonsense. The propaganda of such, if I may say so, theories can only be explained by the demagogic orientation of all these theories, the desire to fool the broad masses of the population, the complete lack of the ability to defend modern rotting, dying capitalism with any really more or less serious arguments. There is no need to dwell on Keynes's theory in more detail. This brief summary of some of the main provisions of Keynes's theory is enough to reveal its class content. To understand that this theory is aimed at protecting capitalist monopolies, not interested in eliminating unemployment and crises, but striving only to maximize profits. Theories are very popular in bourgeois political economy, according to which crises can be eliminated or, in any case, significantly weakened by state intervention in the economy, by strengthening the so-called state regulation, or, as bourgeois economists sometimes say, by planning the national economy. The methods of apologetics for capitalism cannot remain unchanged. They change depending on the general situation. When 5-year plans for the development of the national economy were not yet applied in the USSR, bourgeois economists developed theories of the impossibility of planning the economy and prophesied that planning attempts in the USSR were doomed to failure. The situation changed when planning in the Soviet Union became a fact, when practice not only proved the possibility of planning, but also showed its brilliant results. In these conditions, it would be too absurd to talk about the impossibility of planning, as well as to deny its success. Bourgeois economists, including right-wing socialist economists, are changing their argumentation. They have ceased to deny the possibility of economic planning, but are trying to prove that planning is possible not only in a socialist, but also in a capitalist economy. The theories of planned capitalism are becoming widespread. Planning a capitalist economy is, according to the apologists of modern capitalism, a means of getting rid of crises and unemployment. The planning proposed by bourgeois economists is quite peculiar. These economists constantly emphasize that their proposed planning should not in any way impede private capitalist entrepreneurship, on the contrary, it should support and stimulate private enterprise. Thus, planning is understood to mean something very far from actual planning. Many bourgeois economists even agree to the point that even now most bourgeois countries are not purely capitalist, that in most bourgeois states there is already a mixed economy, spheres of private capitalist economy and spheres coexist at the same time planned, allegedly socialist economy. In the sphere of socialist, or planned economy, they include enterprises owned by the state, municipalities, etc. It is hardly necessary to refute the absurd claims that state or municipal enterprises in countries where power is in the hands of capitalists are socialist. However, these statements are not new. They were spread by bourgeois apologists in the last century. Their absurdity was proved by the founders of Marxism. The planning proposed by modern bourgeois economists is, of course, not real planning. Actual planning is incompatible with capitalist relations of production. While a socialist economy cannot be unplanned, a capitalist economy cannot be planned. Planning is possible only in an economy in which there are no antagonistic contradictions, where the economic law of planned development arises and manifests its effect. Where there is private ownership of the means of production, antagonistic contradictions are inevitable and the emergence of an economic law of planned development is impossible. In monopoly capitalism, where the means of production are concentrated in the hands of a few monopolies, antagonistic contradictions become especially acute. Economic planning is excluded by the very nature of the capitalist mode of production. If we consider the legislation of bourgeois countries, the United States, England and others, on the so-called regulation of the economy, it is easy to find that it is aimed not at increasing the welfare of the broad masses and not at all at eliminating unemployment, but at creating conditions conducive to private capitalist entrepreneurship, at creating conditions that enhance the exploitation of workers and guarantee maximum capitalist profits. It cannot be otherwise, since the governments of modern bourgeois countries are subordinate to monopolies. The chatter of bourgeois and reformist economists about the regulation and planning of the capitalist economy is nothing more than demagoguery aimed at sowing illusions among the broad masses of the population that under capitalism it is possible to get rid of crises and hide the real use of the bourgeois state by monopolies in their own selfish interests. Among the recommended methods for regulating the capitalist economy, many bourgeois apologists emphasize the financial method, that is, the use of the state budget and other financial institutions. Such use is supposedly the most effective method of eliminating or significantly mitigating crises. The recommendation of such a regulation method is based on a certain theory. As you know, for a long time in bourgeois political economy, various credit and monetary theories of crises were spread. Supporters of these theories believe that economic crises are caused by the shortcomings of the monetary system, its insufficient activity. They argue that by means of various measures in the sphere of credit and money circulation, by changing the interest on loans, reducing or expanding credit, etc., it is possible to destroy the cyclical form of movement of the capitalist mode of production. These theories in various versions have been in circulation since the beginning of the economic crises of overproduction, and even Marx cruelly ridiculed these theories and proved their absolute groundlessness. Both the crises that broke out during the period of pre-monopoly capitalism and the crises of the era of imperialism are the most convincing demonstration of the worthlessness and emptiness of credit and monetary theories. But to this day, these theories are quite popular in bourgeois economics. However, the economic situation in the era of imperialism, especially in the period of the general crisis of capitalism, required some change in these theories, their adaptation to the interests of the capitalist monopolies. Recently, theories have become especially popular in bourgeois science, according to which industrial crises and, in particular, monetary crises can be prevented with the help of budget and credit. New versions of credit and monetary theories have emerged, which can be called fiscal theories. According to the supporters of these theories, crises are caused by various circumstances that randomly arise in different spheres of the economy, and the most characteristic manifestations of crises are fluctuations in the size of investments. The elimination of these vacillations should, in the opinion of bourgeois apologists, lead to the elimination of crises. Therefore, the following is recommended. When private investment dwindles when signs of a crisis are detected, the government should come to the rescue. First of all, it should provide financial assistance to capitalists who are under the threat of bankruptcy so that their level of profits does not fall. In this way, according to supporters of fiscal theories, it is possible to counteract the recession. But in addition, when private construction begins to decline due to emerging signs of a crisis, the state must develop its own construction, which will cause a revival in the sectors serving this construction. In this way it is possible, say the apologists of modern capitalism, to counteract the unfolding of the crisis. In order for the state to provide such assistance to the monopolists, the budget must be large enough. Adherents of fiscal theories are supporters of large budgets. But the revenues of the budgets of the capitalist countries, as is known, are mainly made up of taxes on the working people. This means that the recommendation of large budgets is a hidden recommendation to increase taxes. Consequently, according to fiscal theories, in order to prevent crises, it is necessary to provide financial assistance to the monopolies at the expense of tax robbery of the broad masses of the working people. In times of crisis, the possibility of withdrawing funds from workers through taxes is reduced. Therefore, supporters of bourgeois credit theories recommend increasing taxation during the recovery. But the taxation of workers has certain limits, and even large, excessive taxes may not be enough. In these cases, it is recommended to resort to a government loan. Adherents of fiscal theories are supporters of large public debt. They consider the growth of public debt to be expedient, contributing to the prevention of crises. Overcoming crises by means of the budget is the same nonsense, the same fairy tale of bourgeois economists, as the fight against crises through various kinds of credit measures that were recommended by credit and monetary theories. Bourgeois apologists proceed from the assumption that in crises there is a lack of capital, which can be eliminated by financing from the budget. In reality, crises reveal not a shortage, but a surplus, an overproduction of capital. The apologists of capitalism assume that the crisis is the result of a lack of demand, but budget financing means financing through taxes withdrawn from the working people, and this, obviously, does not increase, but reduces the demand of the broad masses of the population. Bourgeois apologists argue that an increase in government debt, used to help capitalists, to stimulate investment, increases demand. But the repayment of the public debt and the payment of interest on this debt are ultimately made at the expense of taxes. Consequently, the growth of public debt, no matter how the latter is used, leads to a decrease in the effective demand of the population. It is not difficult to uncover the class content of credit budget theories. Protecting the interests of monopolies, maintaining their profits at a high level, this is their true content. The glorification of large budgets is intended to justify increasing taxation of the working people in order to guarantee the capitalists consistently high profits in all phases of the capitalist cycle. Currently, the most widespread theory, especially in the United States, is that crises can be prevented by putting the economy on a war footing, by militarizing the economy, or by wars. The real purpose of spreading these theories is clear. They are called upon to justify the military aggression of the imperialists, preparations for a Third World War, to justify the intensification of the exploitation of workers and the plundering of small owners by their monopolies. This brief critical review of modern bourgeois crisis theories shows their falsity and depravity, their focus on protecting the interests of capitalist monopolies, at justifying the intensification of capitalist exploitation, robbing the broad masses of the population, at justifying imperialist aggression and imperialist wars. Contemporary bourgeois theories do not even try to determine the real causes of crises. Numerous authors of various theories of crisis are trying in every possible way to confuse the matter, move away from real research and prove that crises are caused by random circumstances. Therefore, they are not necessary, that while keeping capitalist exploitation intact, it is possible at the same time to eliminate crises. The purpose of their scientific research is not to weaken crises, not to reduce the unemployment that increases during crises, not to rid the workers of poverty and hunger, but only to weaken the negative results of crises for large monopolies, to get rid of these monopolies from the costs of crises, preserve and further increase profits. The reactionary nature and squalor of these theories are predetermined by the fact that in the struggle between the two systems they stand on the side of the old, moribund capitalist system and are directed against the new, emerging and flourishing socialist system.